going to start our final general session for the 2011 Clean the Air and Communities of Color Conference. I am here to introduce Dr. Jeanette Notenius, who is recognized nationally as a leader in the field of Latino and minority health and an expert in tobacco and alcohol policy issues. She is also known internationally for her work with the Pan American Health Organization on health planning, human resources, environmental health, and HIV/AIDS. As an immigrant from El Salvador, she obtained a Master of Arts degree in Counseling and Psychology from Antioch College in Cannes, New Hampshire, and then a Master's in Economics and a Doctorate in Social Sciences from the University of Paris 1 Sorbonne in France. She has worked in many countries, and she speaks English, Spanish, and French. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jeanette Notenius.
I was telling Reverend Walters what difficulty she puts me in. I mean, going after her is a challenge. And I want to thank her for her inspiring words and for saying what needs to be said. That in essence, we are the human race. And by the will of God, every day I stand before God and I say, what would you like me to say today? What am I supposed to do today to serve you? What is it that my role is for me this day? And my role for me this day, and why it's a pleasure for me to be here and thank those before me, Dr. Evans for inviting me, Dr. Benjamin, Johnson, Dressler, Bloom, and everyone who's here, and everyone who was here yesterday. I want to thank you because it is an honor. It is always an honor to serve. To me, tobacco is everything that we have talked about. It's an individual challenge, it's a community challenge, and I'm going to focus on why I see this as a social justice issue. Okay? Sometimes we have to realize that the civil rights movement has to go on. It evolves, it changes. But the fights are there, whether it's for racial equality or it's also for human equality. So I come to you as the National Director of the National Latino Tobacco Control Network. And who we are, you'll have my presentation there, so I'm going to take the slides with a bit of a, not reading it directly. But we are part of the 6 national networks that work together with the states and trying to support communities like your community to build the capacity to fight against the tobacco industry. This is a David and Goliath issue. And we know it. Look at what Dr. Bloom was telling us about. And Reverend Walters, she works with one of those networks, okay? And actually today I discovered that she works for 2 networks. Not only the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network, but she's part of the Education Council that houses the Break Free Alliance. So basically, we have to realize that at the national level, we have realized a long time ago that divided we fall, united we succeed. And so we work multiculturally. We work supporting each other, because when one community is pitted against the other, we all fall. And this is what unfortunately is happening in this nation. We're pitting brown against black. And I want to tell you, it pains me to see that in the state of Arkansas, there are so many anti-immigrant bills. And when Reverend Walters was talking about her passage, and the passages African Americans have had to endure and continue to endure, and every passage that every one of us has had to do, like my colleague who just came here to Arkansas from Chicago, trying to integrate into another community. And what do you get when you're the newcomer? The door is closed. And so there are forces, just like the tobacco industry, there are forces that are designed and financing black journalists, black radio stations, to lift the African American community, to lift a hand against the new immigrants, those Latinos that are coming at your door. I have to say this because I don't want there to be an elephant in the room. And we've talked about calling it like it is. It is hard, and I want to say to you a saying that pains me to say it, because I had the privilege of living in the black community for 5 years. Because unfortunately, we're still living in segregated communities and we do not know one another. We don't know one another. You don't know what it's like to be a Latino. You don't know what it's like to always, what you do know, you know what it's like to be suspect. Every time you come into a store, okay, and you have a young African-American male, he's gonna be followed, and he's going to be suspected, and he's going to be viewed as a thief. That is what it's like to be a Latino now. I want you to know that. I want you to identify with that. And when you close the door on a Latino, think about how that door was also closed upon you. Communities of color are communities of color. And you know the ranges of colors that we have. You look at me and you say, oh, she's as white, she's passed, she's gonna pass. And I tell you, I pass. Okay? I pass, I'm light-skinned, I'm educated, super educated. Why am I super educated? In order to make it, in order to be respected, in order to have that doctor behind me, so that I can stand before you and say what I need to say. That's thanks to the glory of God, not to my accomplishments, but what God wanted me to do. So when I look at you, I say communities of color are all of us. I was saying yesterday, you may think that I'm white, but my father had to sit in the back of the bus in New Orleans when he came to the States. Okay? My nephew, he lives right here in Tennessee, and he doesn't know if it's black or white because they're pitting him. You know, you're not white, you're not black. Okay? The sense of belonging, of community, we don't have that. We are lost. Okay? And I was saying to my colleagues yesterday, and by the way, my great-great-grandmother was black, a slave, freed slave that went into Honduras. She's a garifuna, and what an honor to have such guts of an ancestor. What strength the Africans have given us, and the African Americans. Okay? So, I'm 1/16 black. Therefore, according to the laws of this nation, I am black. And by the way, I want you to know that Latinos, there were more African slaves brought to Brazil than to the U.S.
That's right.
There are Africans all over Latin America. We just don't see them. Okay? We are one people. We are one people. We say in Spanish, we have the black behind the ear. Every time a child is born, we look behind the ear and in between the toes to see the true color they're going to be. And we say, oh, that's my great-grandmother. That's my great-grandfather coming through. All right? So I want you to understand that what you see is only a face. It's a face of somebody that had had the guts to leave their land because they're hungry, they are persecuted, just like many of you who have been hungry and persecuted, and who had to move up north in order to survive. These are passages, and we have that in common. And we have that in common with our own brothers and sisters, the American Indian, Alaskan Native. Think about it, okay? We are all standing in the privilege of Little Rock. And what is Little Rock if it isn't an ancient American Indian site, right? So we have to know that we have been stepping on each other too. So the national networks work together on a mission to say we have to come together and go at these problems together. Because guess what? When the money gets cut in all of the states, what's the first thing that gets cut? Communities of color. And now, when there's no money for anything, who's going to be blamed for all the healthcare costs? We are going to be blamed. So, think about it this way and say, you know, what do we have in common? All of these networks have in common a mission to get communities energized and empowered to deal with their own problems. This is about tobacco control, is about learning to know how to take that sling and really hit Goliath right where it needs to be hit. Why? Because we have very few resources. So we need to be nimble, and we need to be capable, and we need to be well positioned to be able to make a difference. So that's what we do. Our goals are really is to say, if we're not at the table, as I say to many of my colleagues, we're not at the table. And when we're not there, we're not there. And when your Latino colleagues are not at the table in a minority commission, in a minority conference, are you truly being inclusive of all communities of color? There are no Native Americans here. There's not an Asian here. I don't see one. Have we included them? Are we leaving them behind? And yet, who are the people that own these stores? I stopped by 2 gas stations. Both of them were South Asian. Have we engaged them? Have we communicated with them? We consider them part of the problem. And guess what? They're part of the solution. So when we think about tobacco control as a social justice issue, we think about a network of networks of people. There's some materials outside there, and I'm not going to dwell, and you have my website to see the kinds of technical assistance and training we provide. But this is not about us. This is about why is it that I consider this a social justice issue? Because guess what? People of color represent 36% of this nation. Not just that, let's look at how that has changed. Let's look at the numbers, okay? When I hear, and I have a lot of colleagues that say, I'm tired, Jeanette, of you saying that you're gonna have the numbers. And I say to them, my African American colleagues, you have the institutions. We have the numbers and no institutions. How can we work together there? You know, so many institutions are dwindling. It pains me to be here in Pine Bluff to see how many boarded houses and what is happening here in this community. And I say to myself, how can we then bring in new blood, people that are going to, you know, like, could you believe that Detroit, who do you think are the new people that have moved into Detroit when African Americans left? It's been Latinos. It's been Latinos. What happened to Providence, Rhode Island that was just dying? Latinos came in there and Providence is back up again. We have to not look at one another exactly as Reverend Walter said. It's about our assets. And those numbers show that we can be an asset together. That's what those numbers are showing, you know. 16.3% now. But guess what? Okay? Look at all the places people come from. It isn't just Mexico. It's China. When I see the Philippines, what comes to mind? Philippines. What comes to mind in terms of an immigrant? Anybody? Did you know that the U.S. has been importing nurses from the Philippines for the last 20 years? That's why the Philippines. That they designed it in such a way that that's what's happening. Look at India. Where are we getting all our computer programmers and doctors? 10 years ago, 36,000 physicians of Indian origin, they had an organization, and they still have it. And now it's probably 40,000. So in other words, people are coming here because there is a need that is not being filled. Okay? There is a need. So you look at that and then you say, and we're an English-only place. It's over. We can't be that. We're a global society. It's interesting how we have all of these bills that say it's English only. And all over the world, I lived in Europe, I lived in France, and I tell you, I was humbled. Everybody at the table where I sat, they were speaking 5, 6, 7 languages. It was the norm. They could go anywhere and live and work. And where can we work? So we really, in other words, we're cutting our noses in spite of our face. And I hope, and I do hope, that you are promoting language learning. Because, you know, with a language, the Turks in Turkey say that you're a different person for every language you speak. What does that mean? It means that you bring a culture, a perspective, a way of honoring even God. It's another way of looking at life. Wow. You know? My God, that's what each one of us brings. And remember, you know, African Americans, a good 10% of African Americans are immigrants. They're coming in from the Caribbean, from Africa, from places where war is just being torn, tearing people apart and killing them, from boy soldiers to people dying with HIV. It's over. People are going to come here, and guess what? We need them. How many teachers, how many teachers are here from Guyana? We import teachers that are English speaking. Right? So look at that. And so these people bring an asset to the nation because they can communicate with the nation. And the reality is that 40 years from now, we're going to look different. My friends, this is what we're going to look like. This is not Marlboro country anymore. So you look at the distribution, where we are now and where we're going to be. What does that mean? Are we ready for that change? I mean, really, think about it. And what do we know of that population? I see all of these young people. Last night I had the pleasure of being with two very bright ladies who work in advertising and do the advertising and promotion of our mission, you know. And I saw them and I kept on thinking, when they are going to be my age, they're going to be doing marketing to a totally different population. So if we don't face up to it now, we're not preparing for it. Okay? We're not prepared. Look at the difference. Look at the number also of people that are going to be multiracial. It's over. People are calling themselves multiracial, and they are. Because we cannot continue. Look at the advertising. They now are choosing those people that are multiracial. So the image of ourselves is changing. All right? And here is the kicker that absolutely drives me up the tree. All of those numbers, what do they really mean when we are becoming poorer and poorer, and those that are poorer are communities of color? What are the implications when actually the most important determining factor for health is income? Yes, there is massive racial discrimination. Unfortunately, if Dr. Walters goes in here and is taken to an emergency room, regardless, she's not going to be treated with respect. She's not going to be given the best medications. It's like, it's interesting, there were lots of studies in Los Angeles. Latinos would come into the emergency room. If you're a woman and if you're a Latina, they would send you home with an aspirin and a Tylenol. Okay? This is happening now. Nonetheless, poverty, okay, and the prejudices that unfortunately we still carry. So, we are not in good shape. But look at what's happening in the states around you in terms of increases of Latino population. Look at Arkansas. There's been a change in 10 years. Okay? Maryland, Minnesota, look at North Carolina. All right? So, people are coming. And I did a little bit of a work on the census looking at Arkansas and Latino populations. Where, you know, where is it that we are? All right? And here it is. Okay? Look at the percentage of the population and say, look, whites, African Americans have gone down in population in Arkansas, in percentage-wise. Look at the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, 251% increase. Yes, they started with very little. I keep on thinking, well, that may be, you know, 100 families, but hey, 100 families. Okay? There's a change a-coming, as they say. And these are the counties where Latinos are settling. Benson, Washington, Pulaski, Sebastian, Sevier, and these are the cities. Springdale, Rogers, Fayetteville, Bentonville. Look at that. Any of you from any of those counties, can you raise your hands? Okay, one, okay. Interesting, see? And here are the largest Hispanic population in the top 5 counties. Why do you think we are there? In Benton, in Pulaski, where? In Sevier. Now, anybody, can you answer that for me?
Jobs.
Huh?
Jobs.
Jobs. What kind of jobs? Huh? Tyson's. What does that mean? Meat packing, chicken meat packing. You know what that means? It's standing for 10 hours a day, smelling garbage and blood. That's what those jobs are. And it shows it right there. Who's going to want to do that job?
Somebody hungry.
Somebody hungry is going to do that job. Somebody that has to then send that money home to feed their children. That's who Latinos are. They can't spend all their money here in the States. They have to feed other families. Here I am. I've been an immigrant since 1967. Since 1967, I'm sending money home. You know, my mom needs me. There was no Social Security over there. There's no Medicaid. There's no Medicare. There's only the daughters and sons that have to live out here in order to feed her down there and keep her clothed and going to the doctor and so on and so forth. That's what the reality is. I just want you to get a feeling of what it's like to never have a paycheck to use yourself. The first thing is you put the cut for the family. Talk about family values. Talk about what Reverend Walters was talking about. What does it mean to be a Christian if it isn't to feed your family, for God's sake? What is it? That's the bottom line. And that's who those people are. They live their Christianity in that sense. So it's important for you to think that they're not there out to make a buck. First of all, at minimum wage, do you think they're going to make a big buck and they still have to send money home? Why do you see all this cash checking, places, right? Why? Because that's where you then send the money. It's important for you to realize that, guess what? We're young. And if you think about the percentage of kids, okay, under 18, look at the numbers. In Arkansas, look at the numbers. There's been a 38% change. And that means that we really, by 2020, if we're 162,000 now, and there's projected to 240, what does that mean? It's almost double. That's a lot. And those kids are US born citizens. They're not going to go away. Okay? So when I look at social justice, I mean, as who is there? 36% of the population are communities of color. And the younger the Latinos are, the younger the population, the more we are. Just pray for the tobacco industry. Okay? Right now, kids of color, if we are 36% of the population, remember, 36%, every time that you go any place, it makes a big difference if you meet with a legislator and you say, hey, communities of color are 36%. That's something to think about. But kids, 44% now are kids of color. In the South, there was a study done that showed that African Americans and Latinos are over 51% of all of the public schools in the South. How about that? Huh? Who won the Civil War? So, the nation's children, this is what I feel is happening. All right? We're talking about the future. So, what does that mean? Look at that in Arkansas. I was really surprised to see that right now, there are more Latino kids in Arkansas than African American kids. You may not be living in the same counties because we're still very segregated. But if you go to counties, I was talking with a young lady from a county that said now her school, when she started growing there, it was half African American and half Latino. Now it's 80% Latino. Okay? And the poverty, look at where we are. The poverty is still in the South. These are poor children. And they are what? Children of color. So, still black children have the highest percentage of poor children in the nation. But guess what? Latino children are not far behind, and they have higher numbers. So what does that mean? That we're going to have a higher percentage of the population that is poor. And you know, I'm talking about this, I just realized that there's a fait accompli of something that's going to happen, that's something that's inevitable. And I say to myself, Jeanette, my God, how dare you? How dare you not have hope that we can change this? As Reverend Walters would say, you know, God has a plan. But it's about us really implementing it and about seeing these numbers and saying, oh my God, what does that mean? Okay? What does that mean? Poor children, okay, with parents who are immigrants. If they're immigrants, they're more likely to be poorer. Okay? And Latinos are not all the same, just like African Americans. We're not all the same, and each subgroup is different. The percentages of poor are different depending on the ethnic group in here. I have no idea who are the Latinos in Arkansas. There's no study that determines now by subgroup, so we really don't know. We assume they're Mexican and Mexican Americans. But yet, meeting some of the Latinos yesterday, we have somebody from Colombia, somebody from Honduras. Anybody else? Nicaragua. Texas, of course. So basically, we have a problem, and we said it this morning in terms of the Arkansas youth, because when we go to a community, we become like that community. Okay? It's interesting. We talked about menthol today, and it's 70% to 80% of African Americans smoke menthol. And my colleagues in California said, oh no, Latinos have not a menthol problem. They're not smoking menthol. And I said, what about those in Maryland? What about those in Virginia? What about those in New York? In other words, if we live with large black communities, we become black. We are targeted the same way. We take the same habits. Guess what? We have the highest obesity rate in children. Why? We live in the same situations where there are no grocery stores, where, you know, you couldn't get a good meal, healthy meal, because everything is fast food, right? So we have to look at this, that tobacco is, the face of tobacco is about the poor. In other words, the rich are educated and they don't have to smoke. They have other coping mechanisms, right? They have health insurance.